Sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the truth that every powerful man has spent years trying to bury. I never imagined that an ordinary Thursday evening would become the dividing line between the life I thought I understood and the life waiting quietly behind it. My name is Claire Bennett, and at 28 years old, I worked as a maid inside one of the largest estates on the Upper East Side. Every morning before sunrise, I tied my blonde hair into a simple bun, slipped into my Navy housekeeping uniform, and reminded myself that invisible people survived longer than noticeable ones. It was easier that way. Rich families rarely remembered the woman who polished their marble floors or arranged fresh flowers in crystal vases. I preferred it. Invisible meant safe. That afternoon the mansion buzzed with preparations for the annual charity gala. Delivery trucks lined the circular driveway, florists carried enormous white roses through the front entrance, and caterers hurried across polished hallways balancing trays that smelled of butter, rosemary, and warm bread. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across every surface until the entire house looked like something pulled from an expensive magazine. I quietly dusted the grand staircase while soft piano music echoed through the ballroom, trying not to think about the overdue rent notice folded inside my purse. My 5-year-old daughter, Lily, sat on a small stool beside the laundry room coloring butterflies in an old notebook because her babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. She had inherited my pale skin, curious blue eyes, and the impossible habit of smiling at strangers as though the world had never given anyone a reason to be afraid. I reminded her at least 3 times not to wander. She nodded every single time with complete sincerity, which somehow made me trust her far more than I should have. By 6 o'clock, expensive cars began gliding through the iron gates one after another. Men stepped out wearing tailored tuxedos worth more than my annual salary, while women drifted across the front steps wrapped in elegant gowns that shimmered beneath the estate lights. Then everything changed without anyone announcing it. Conversations softened. Security personnel straightened their posture almost instantly. Even the homeowners hurried toward the entrance with nervous smiles. I glanced through the enormous front window just long enough to see a black luxury SUV stop beneath the porte-cochere. A tall man stepped out first. His charcoal tuxedo fit perfectly against broad shoulders, and his calm expression carried the effortless confidence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to command a room. His dark hair was neatly brushed back, revealing striking blue eyes that scanned every detail around him before settling on the mansion itself. Around his neck, partially hidden beneath the crisp white collar of his shirt, rested a silver necklace. My heartbeat skipped for a reason I couldn't explain. Something about it felt strangely familiar, like hearing the last note of a forgotten song. Before I could look again, I heard tiny footsteps racing across the polished floor behind me. I turned too late. Lily had slipped past the ballroom doors, weaving fearlessly between elegantly dressed guests until she stopped directly in front of the powerful stranger. She tilted her head, looked up into his face with innocent certainty, pointed at the silver necklace resting against his chest, and smiled. "That necklace belongs to my mommy, sir." The music continued playing, but every other sound inside the ballroom seemed to disappear. For one endless second, the entire ballroom stood perfectly still. The string quartet continued playing somewhere behind me, yet every note sounded strangely distant, as though I had fallen underwater. I reached Lily before anyone else could move. My hands trembled as I gently rested them on her small shoulders and forced a smile that felt painfully unnatural. "I am so sorry," I whispered, looking toward the distinguished guest instead of my daughter. "She is only 5. She loves making up stories." Lily frowned immediately. She tugged lightly on my sleeve and looked up at me with innocent confusion. "I am not making up stories, Mommy. Grandma showed me that necklace in your picture box." My heart stopped so abruptly that I forgot how to breathe. I had hidden every old photograph years ago inside a sealed cardboard box in the back of my apartment closet. Lily had discovered it during a rainy Saturday while I was folding laundry, and I remembered letting her look through the faded family pictures for a few minutes before putting everything away again. There had been no picture of that necklace. At least none that I remembered. The man standing before us did not speak. His blue eyes remained fixed on my face with unsettling calm, studying every tiny reaction that I desperately tried to hide. Up close, he looked even younger than I had expected, perhaps 34, yet there was something timeless in his expression, as though responsibility had quietly aged him long before the calendar ever could. Around us, conversation slowly resumed, although I could still feel curious glances drifting in our direction. The owners of the estate hurried over wearing practiced smiles. "Mr. DeLuca," the host said nervously, "please accept our apologies. The staff will handle this immediately." Adrian DeLuca. The name settled into my mind with unexpected weight. I had heard it before, whispered in newspapers, mentioned during business interviews on television, always described as a brilliant investor whose private life remained almost entirely unknown. He acknowledged the host with a polite nod but never looked away from me. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee until he was eye level with Lily. His voice remained gentle, measured, almost surprisingly warm. "Can you tell me why you think that necklace belongs to your mommy?" Lily smiled with complete confidence. "Because mommy has one just like it." My stomach tightened. "Lily," I interrupted quickly, "that is enough." She blinked, surprised by the firmness in my voice. I rarely corrected her so sharply. Adrian finally lifted his eyes toward me. There was no accusation in them, only quiet curiosity mixed with something I could not identify. Recognition, perhaps? Or hope? "Does she?" he asked softly. The simple question carried far more weight than it should have. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "No," I answered. "My daughter is mistaken." He studied me for another long moment before giving the smallest nod. "Children usually notice details adults overlook," he replied. "But sometimes memories can become tangled." His words unsettled me far more than they should have. Somehow they sounded less like a casual observation and more like a message meant only for me. Before I could answer, one of the security managers approached and quietly informed him that several important guests were waiting inside the private reception room. Adrian stood without another word, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, and walked away through the crowd. Yet just before disappearing beyond the ballroom doors, he glanced back once. Not at Lily. At me. That single look followed me for the rest of the evening like a question I had no memory of asking. The gala finally settled back into its polished rhythm, but I could not. Every silver tray I carried suddenly felt twice as heavy, every smiling guest seemed impossibly far away, and every reflection I caught in the towering windows looked like someone else wearing my face. I kept replaying Adrian DeLuca's expression in my mind. It had not been confusion. It had not even been surprise. It had looked painfully close to recognition, and that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. By 8:30, I slipped into the service hallway to collect fresh linen napkins, grateful for the quiet hum of industrial refrigerators and the familiar scent of clean cotton. Lily sat exactly where I had left her in the staff lounge, swinging her small legs beneath a folding chair while drawing another butterfly with bright blue crayons. She looked up and smiled the moment she saw me. "Did I do something bad?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "No, sweetheart. You did not do anything bad." She tilted her head. "Then why were you scared?" Children always notice the questions adults tried hardest to hide. I kissed her forehead without answering because I honestly did not know. A few minutes later, Mrs. Ashcroft, the estate manager, appeared at the doorway. Her usually cheerful face carried an unusual seriousness. "Claire," she said quietly, "Mr. DeLuca has requested a word with you before he leaves." My pulse immediately climbed into my throat. "Did he say why?" She shook her head. "Only that it would take a minute." I followed her through a series of silent corridors until we reached the mansion's library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded the room, and a fire crackled gently inside the marble fireplace despite the mild October evening. Adrian stood alone beside one of the tall windows overlooking the illuminated gardens. He did not turn immediately when I entered. Instead, he watched the fountain outside as though searching for an answer hidden inside the flowing water. "Thank you for coming," he said at last. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Mrs. Ashcroft quietly closed the door behind me, leaving us alone. I folded my hands together to keep them from shaking. If this is about my daughter, I apologize again. He turned toward me. It is not an apology I want. There was no anger in his face. Only patience. I simply have a question. I waited. How long have you owned that family photo box your daughter mentioned? The question caught me completely off guard. Since my grandmother passed away, I answered carefully. She left me a few personal belongings. Adrian nodded slowly, as though placing another piece into an invisible puzzle. Did she ever tell you where they came from? No. Did she ever speak about New York before you were born? My chest tightened. Very little. His blue eyes never left mine. Or about someone named Evelyn? The name echoed through my mind with unsettling familiarity. Evelyn. I could not remember where I had heard it before, only that it stirred something buried deep beneath years of ordinary memories. I swallowed. I do not know anyone by that name. Adrian studied my face in complete silence. It felt less like an interrogation and more like he was waiting for a memory to appear on its own. Finally, he reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and removed a faded photograph no larger than a postcard. He looked at it for only a second before sliding it back without showing me the image. Forgive me, he said quietly. I thought perhaps you could help answer a question I have carried for 7 years. He offered the faintest smile, one that never reached his eyes. It appears I was mistaken. I nodded politely, eager to leave, but as I reached the library door, he spoke one final sentence that stopped me in my tracks. If your daughter ever mentions that necklace again, he said softly, please do not tell her she imagined it. Sometimes children remember stories that adults were never meant to forget. I barely remember driving home that night. The city lights drifted across my windshield in blurred streaks of gold and white while Lily slept peacefully in her booster seat, hugging the stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since her 3rd birthday. Every red light gave me another chance to replay the evening inside my head. Adrian's questions. The name Evelyn. The faded photograph he had refused to show me. None of it made sense, yet the uneasy feeling refused to leave. When we finally reached our small apartment in Queens, I carried Lily inside without waking her. She wrapped one tiny arm around my neck as I tucked her beneath her favorite blue blanket, kissed her forehead, and quietly closed the bedroom door. Sleep should have come easily after a 14-hour shift, but instead I found myself standing in front of my bedroom closet, staring at the old cardboard storage box resting on the highest shelf. Dust coated the edges exactly as I remembered. I had not opened it in years. My fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were birthday cards, faded recipes written in my grandmother's careful handwriting, school report cards, and stacks of aging photographs held together with brittle rubber bands. The familiar scent of old paper filled the room. I slowly turned each photograph beneath the warm glow of my bedside lamp. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. A fishing trip beside a quiet lake. My grandmother smiling on a front porch I barely remembered. Everything looked ordinary until one small envelope slipped from between 2 photographs and landed on the floor. I frowned. I had never seen it before. My name was not written on it. There was no address. Only a pressed white flower tucked inside beside a tiny handwritten note. Protect what she cannot remember. My breath caught. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something about those 6 words made the room suddenly feel colder. I searched the rest of the box, hoping for another explanation, yet found nothing except one final photograph hidden beneath the false cardboard bottom. The picture had faded with time. A younger version of my grandmother stood outside an unfamiliar brownstone beside a woman whose face had been damaged by moisture, leaving only the outline of light hair and pale skin. Around the woman's neck hung a silver necklace nearly identical to the one Adrian wore. I stared at the image until my eyes blurred. It was impossible. My grandmother had never mentioned anyone connected to that necklace. She had always insisted our family had lived quiet, ordinary lives. The sound of my phone vibrating against the kitchen counter startled me. Unknown number. I almost ignored it before answering. Hello? Silence greeted me for several seconds. Then a calm male voice finally spoke. Miss Bennett, my name is Daniel Brooks. I work for Mr. DeLuca. Every muscle in my body tightened. I think there has been a misunderstanding, I replied carefully. I have already answered his questions. This is not about tonight, Daniel said politely. Mr. DeLuca asked me to verify public records after leaving the gala. Your employment history, education, driver's license, and rental records are all exactly as expected. I frowned. Then why are you calling? Another brief silence followed. Because everything before your 18th birthday appears to disappear. My grip tightened around the phone. What does that mean? It means, he answered quietly, someone went to extraordinary lengths to erase every trace of your childhood. Before I could ask another question, the line disconnected. I lowered the phone slowly, my heartbeat echoing through the silent apartment. On the coffee table, the old photograph remained beneath the lamp, and for the first time in my life, I realized I was no longer searching through forgotten memories. They had quietly begun searching for me. The next morning arrived wrapped in a gray October sky that matched the heaviness sitting inside my chest. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the silver necklace resting against Adrian DeLuca's collar, the faded photograph hidden beneath the cardboard box, and the handwritten note that refused to leave my thoughts. Protect what she cannot remember. I slipped the note back into the envelope before Lily woke, telling myself I would think more clearly after work. It was a lie I wanted to believe. The subway ride into Manhattan felt unusually quiet. Commuters stared into their phones, coffee cups warmed tired hands, and the train rocked gently beneath the city as though nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. I watched my reflection in the dark window and noticed details I had ignored for years. My blue eyes looked familiar in a way I could not explain. The small crescent-shaped birthmark near my left wrist suddenly seemed important, although I had no reason to think so. By 8 o'clock I was back inside the Ashcroft estate, replacing fresh flowers and guest suites that had already emptied after the gala. The mansion had returned to its ordinary elegance. Crystal glasses had disappeared. Musicians were gone. Only the scent of polished wood and fresh lilies lingered through the hallways. I hoped the strange encounter had ended with the previous evening. It had not. Mrs. Ashcroft found me arranging towels in the upstairs guest wing. Claire, she said with surprising softness, someone left this for you. She handed me a plain white gift bag with no name attached. Inside rested a beautifully illustrated children's book about constellations and a handwritten card. For Lily. Every child deserves stories that help them dream. There was no signature. None was necessary. I looked up immediately. Who delivered it? Mrs. Ashcroft smiled faintly. A gentleman in a dark suit about 20 minutes ago. He said nothing else? I stared at the little book for several moments before placing it carefully inside my locker. It was thoughtful. Respectful. Yet somehow it unsettled me more than any direct question ever could. Adrian was not trying to buy my trust. He was patiently stepping into the edges of my life without crossing any visible line. During my lunch break, I called my grandmother's oldest friend, Margaret Ellis, the only person still alive who had known our family before I turned 18. She answered after the third ring, her cheerful voice immediately recognizing mine. We exchanged a few polite words before I asked the question that had haunted me since the previous night. Did my grandmother ever know someone named Evelyn? Silence stretched across the line. Too long to be accidental. Finally Margaret sighed. Claire, where did you hear that name? My fingers tightened around the phone. So you do know her? Another pause. I promise never to speak about those years. Please, I whispered. I think something important has been hidden from me. Margaret's voice became unusually gentle. Your grandmother believed forgetting would protect you. She loved you enough to carry that burden herself. Before I could ask another question, she quietly added, "If someone has started asking about Evelyn, then the past has finally caught up." The call ended moments later with more questions than answers. As I slipped my phone into my pocket, I noticed someone standing across the street beyond the estate gates. Adrian was not wearing a tailored suit this time. Just a charcoal overcoat and a simple navy scarf. He was speaking with an elderly flower vendor whose small stand sat on the corner every morning. He accepted a single white lily, thanked her with an easy smile, and walked away without ever looking toward the mansion. Yet somehow, deep inside, I knew he had never lost sight of me. For the next several days, I convinced myself that staying busy would quiet the questions growing louder inside my head. It did not. Every polished mirror reflected a woman who suddenly felt like a stranger to herself. Every quiet moment invited another memory that stopped just short of becoming clear. I could almost reach it, almost hear it, almost remember, but it always disappeared like morning fog the instant I stepped closer. Then, on Friday afternoon, everything shifted again. Mrs. Ashcroft asked me to deliver fresh towels and tea service to the estate's private guest cottage, a small stone building tucked behind the formal gardens where important visitors occasionally stayed. It was usually empty, which made the request unusual. I balanced the silver tray carefully as I walked along the brick pathway lined with white hydrangeas beginning to lose their autumn blooms. The air carried the scent of damp leaves and distant rain. When I reached the cottage, the front door stood slightly open. I knocked softly before stepping inside. The sitting room was quiet except for the gentle crackle of a fireplace. An elderly woman sat beside the window wrapped in a cream-colored shawl, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She looked elegant despite the oxygen tube resting beneath her nose. The moment our eyes met, the teacups slipped from her trembling hands and landed harmlessly on the thick rug. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "It cannot be," she whispered. I froze where I stood. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She slowly rose to her feet, ignoring the cane beside her chair. Every step toward me seemed to carry years of unspoken memories. Her weathered hand reached toward my face before stopping just inches away, as though she feared touching a ghost. "Those eyes," she breathed. "Exactly like Evelyn." My heartbeat thundered inside my ears. "You knew her?" The woman closed her eyes and nodded. "She was my sister." The room suddenly felt impossibly small. Before I could ask another question, she looked over my shoulder toward the open doorway. Adrian stood there in complete silence. He had not interrupted. He had simply watched. His expression remained calm, but something deep behind his eyes had changed. The elderly woman turned toward him with visible emotion. "Adrian," she said quietly, "why did you not tell me?" His answer came almost as a whisper. "Because I was not certain until now." She looked back at me, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "My dear, what is your birthday?" I answered automatically. "March 14th. She covered her mouth with shaking fingers. "No," she whispered. "That was the day they changed it." My knees weakened. "Changed what?" She reached into the pocket of her shawl and carefully unfolded an old newspaper clipping that had yellowed with age. The edges were worn from being opened countless times. At the top was a photograph of a smiling young woman with pale skin and light hair. Even faded by time, the resemblance stole my breath. She looked enough like me to have been my older sister. Around her neck rested the same silver necklace. Beneath the photograph appeared a single name: Evelyn Carter. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. "Who is she?" I whispered. The elderly woman's voice broke as she answered. "She was your mother." My hands began trembling so violently that the silver tray slipped from my grasp, the teapot landing harmlessly on the thick carpet without breaking. Adrian stepped forward instinctively, stopping just short of reaching for me. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Because in that quiet room, surrounded by fading autumn light and memories buried for decades, I realized the greatest mystery had never been the necklace. It was why someone had spent an entire lifetime making sure I would never know the name of the woman who gave me mine. The words settled over me with unbearable quiet. My mother. I repeated them silently, hoping they would somehow become familiar, but they only sounded like someone else's story. I stared at the faded newspaper until the ink blurred beneath the tears gathering in my eyes. The smiling woman in the photograph had my cheekbones, my pale complexion, and the same blue eyes that had looked back at me every morning in the mirror. Yet I had spent 28 years believing I knew where I came from. Why was I never told? I whispered. The elderly woman slowly lowered herself into the armchair again, exhaustion replacing the burst of emotion that had carried her across the room. Because Evelyn begged your grandmother to disappear with you if anything ever happened to her, she said softly. She believed you deserved an ordinary life, far away from the burdens that followed our family. I looked toward Adrian for the first time since entering the cottage. He remained standing quietly beside the fireplace, giving me space instead of answers. That simple restraint somehow made me trust him more than any explanation could have. You knew my mother, I said. It was not a question. He nodded once. Yes. How? His eyes drifted toward the old newspaper clipping before returning to mine. She saved my life when I was 27. The room fell silent again. I searched his face, expecting hesitation or uncertainty, but there was none. Only sadness that had clearly lived inside him for many years. There was an accident during a charity event, he continued calmly. Nothing criminal. Nothing dramatic. A section of an old balcony collapsed without warning. I would have fallen if your mother had not pushed me aside. His voice remained steady, yet I noticed his fingers tightening slightly around the back of a wooden chair. She was injured while protecting me. After that day, our lives crossed several more times. The elderly woman smiled faintly through her tears. They became dear friends. Something warm flickered inside my chest, followed almost immediately by confusion. If you knew her so well, why did you stop looking? Adrian's expression changed. I never did. His answer came without hesitation. 7 years ago, every official record connected to Evelyn disappeared within weeks. Her apartment was emptied. Her workplace closed. Every person who knew where she had gone either truly did not know or refused to say. I searched because I believed she was still alive. I swallowed hard. But she was not. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment. No. The elderly woman reached toward a small wooden box resting on the side table. Carefully opening it, she removed a tiny silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. Your grandmother left this with me before she passed away, she said, placing it gently into my trembling hand. She said I would know when the time was right. I examined the key closely. It looked old, delicate, almost identical in color to Adrian's necklace. What does it open? I asked. She shook her head. She never told me. Adrian looked at the key for several quiet seconds before something flashed across his face. Recognition. Without speaking, he reached beneath his shirt and carefully lifted the silver necklace into the light. For the first time, I noticed a tiny keyhole hidden within the engraved pendant itself. My breath caught. Neither of us moved. The room seemed to hold its breath along with us. The little key resting in my palm was not merely similar. It had been made for that necklace. And somehow, long before my daughter recognized the pendant across a crowded ballroom, my family had already been holding the missing piece. My fingers trembled as I held the tiny silver key above the pendant resting in Adrian's palm. Neither of us spoke. The elderly woman quietly watched from her chair, her eyes filled with the patient hope of someone who had waited years for this single moment. I hesitated only a second before carefully sliding the key into the nearly invisible lock. It fit perfectly. A soft metallic click echoed through the silent cottage. Adrian looked as surprised as I felt. The pendant did not simply unlock. It slowly unfolded into two delicate halves, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a postage stamp. Folded neatly inside rested an impossibly thin piece of paper protected beneath clear wax. Adrian carefully removed it with remarkable gentleness, as though even the slightest careless movement might erase the past forever. Together we leaned closer beneath the warm light from the nearby lamp. The handwriting was elegant and unmistakably feminine. My heart tightened before I had even read the first sentence. If you are reading this, then Claire has finally found her way home. I covered my mouth with one trembling hand. My own name stared back at me from ink that had dried many years before. Adrian silently handed me the letter without attempting to read another word first. It belonged to me. I unfolded the fragile paper as carefully as I could. My dearest Claire, if life has allowed this message to reach you, then it means 2 miracles have happened. You survived, and someone who truly cared about you never stopped searching. I felt tears slipping down my face before I continued. I never wanted you to inherit fear. I wanted you to inherit kindness. That is why I asked your grandmother to raise you far away from everything connected to my name. There are people who measure success by power, but I learned too late that the greatest strength is choosing compassion when fear tells you not to. If Adrian is standing beside you now, trust him. He once trusted me with his life, and I trusted him with yours. I stopped reading. My vision blurred completely. Adrian lowered his head, saying nothing, allowing the silence to honor words that neither of us could change. The elderly woman quietly wiped away her own tears before speaking. Your mother wrote that letter only a few weeks before she became ill. She knew she did not have much time. I folded the paper carefully, afraid even my heartbeat might damage it. She knew I would read this someday? The woman smiled sadly. She hoped. Adrian finally spoke, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. Your mother believed that truth should arrive only when it could heal instead of harm. At that exact moment, my phone rang. Lily's cheerful face appeared on the screen through the video call request from my neighbor, who was watching her after school. I answered immediately. Lily grinned the moment she saw me. Mommy, look what I drew. She held up a picture covered in bright crayons. 3 people stood beneath a blue sky holding hands. 1 little girl. 1 woman. 1 tall man wearing a silver necklace. Above them she had carefully written in uneven letters, family. My breath caught again. That is beautiful, I whispered. Lily smiled proudly. The nice necklace man smiled today. I think he was lonely before. I looked across the room at Adrian. He had heard every word, yet his expression remained quietly humble. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Simply grateful. After the call ended, I looked down once more at my mother's letter. For years I believed the necklace had been the mystery. Now I understood it had never been hidden to protect a secret. It had been hidden to protect a promise, one that had quietly survived long enough for a little girl with an honest heart to recognize it before any adult ever could. The following Sunday morning, sunlight poured gently through the stained glass windows of the little church where my grandmother had once volunteered every weekend. It was quiet there, untouched by the noise that had filled my thoughts for days. Lily skipped a few steps ahead of me, carefully carrying 3 white lilies wrapped in simple brown paper. She insisted that flowers should always be shared with people we loved, even if they could no longer answer back. I smiled through the ache in my chest because she had somehow learned the lesson my mother had tried to leave behind without ever meeting her. We stopped before a modest stone engraved with a single name. Evelyn Carter. Loving daughter. Loving mother. Forever kind. I knelt beside the grave, gently placing my hand against the cool granite. For the first time in my life, I was not standing before the resting place of a stranger. I was meeting my mother. I found your letter, I whispered. I finally know why Grandma protected me. I finally know why you believed kindness mattered more than fear. The autumn breeze carried the faint scent of pine and fresh earth across the hillside. Behind me, measured footsteps approached without hurry. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. Adrian stopped several feet away, respecting the silence before quietly placing a single white lily beside ours. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, I stood and faced him. His silver necklace rested once again against his collar, but now I understood what it truly represented. It was never a symbol of wealth or status. It was the last promise my mother had entrusted to someone she believed would keep it. Adrian looked at me with the same calm expression he had worn since the gala, but there was something lighter in his eyes now, as though a burden carried for years had finally begun to lift. "Your mother once told me that hope is rarely loud," he said softly. "Most of the time, it arrives quietly and waits for someone brave enough to notice it." I smiled faintly. "Lily noticed it before either of us did." He nodded. "She did." We walked together through the cemetery path where golden leaves drifted slowly across the grass. There was no urgency between us, no dramatic declaration, no impossible promise. Only two people learning that the past did not have to remain a prison forever. When we reached the parking lot, Lily ran toward us holding a small acorn she had found beneath an old oak tree. "Look," she said proudly. "It is tiny now, but it will become something big someday." Adrian accepted the little acorn as though she had handed him something priceless. He slipped it carefully into his coat pocket and smiled. "I think you are right." Weeks passed after that morning, and life slowly found a new rhythm. I remained at the Ashcroft estate for a while longer before accepting a scholarship established years earlier in my mother's name, one I never knew existed until Adrian quietly uncovered the records. I returned to college to finish the education I had postponed for Lily, while she continued filling every ordinary day with extraordinary questions and fearless honesty. Adrian never tried to change our lives with grand gestures. Instead, he appeared at school recitals, brought storybooks instead of expensive gifts, remembered birthdays, and always knocked before entering our world. Looking back now, I realized the greatest miracle was never discovering who my mother had been. It was discovering that love can survive through promises, memories, and quiet acts of faith long after voices have fallen silent. One innocent sentence from a little girl reopened a door that time had sealed shut, and on the other side waited not power, not fortune, but family. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks into a crowded room holding the hand of a child who is simply honest enough to tell the truth.